Well, another month has come and gone. It's time for my August reading wrap-up. This was a pretty good month. I feel like I could have read more than I did, but I read a decent amount. And the month started off, going chronologically, with me reading some of my fellow booktubers in indie author work. This was Indie Author August, a reading event created by Kevin Toll Reads and co-hosted by Nicole at Nicole's Bookish Nook, who is an indie author herself. Now, I covered these books from these indie authors in much more detail earlier in the month in a video, and I'll link to that below, but I'll just briefly name them again here. First, I read the first two, and so far only, volumes in Erik Waag's Sword and 70s series, some fun urban fantasy / sword and sorcery, a couple of novelettes. He wrote That Axe Anciently Was Mine and Fangs of the Moon Opal. Those were a lot of fun. Erik does a really good job with action. Those are pretty action-packed and swiftly paced. Next, I read The Sunken Door, a novel by Levi Wallace, the outlaw Levi Wallace, who has a fun channel of his own. And this was a very fun horror kind of, I guess you could say, elements of coming of age, Stephen King, Stranger Things vibe mixed with some super cool mythology stuff, serial killer vibe as well. Plenty of strange, magical, and surreal stuff going on. That was quite interesting, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. And finally, I checked out the Sword and Sorcery collection Sand and Steel by T.H. Brandt, Tim from Secret Fire Books, who has a very successful and fun channel of his own. And those were also a lot of fun, kind of classic pulp era, I suppose, influenced sword and sorcery tales with a nice Fritz Leiber and Robert E. Howard vibe. You know, you can see Tim's influences clearly, but he also goes his own direction and brings his own new stamp on things. Anyway, I enjoyed reading some of these independent authors. It's not something I generally do. I generally read established authors or, authors I've known for a long time and I'm trying to get into more. But this is a good reminder that there are people today doing good stuff and I should be on the lookout for them. Moving on, I also read a very cool, again, modern, although not an independent author, modern author's take on a classic subgenre, the locked room murder mystery. And this is Tom Mead. I read his fourth novel, The House at Devil's Neck. Now, this was just released, at least on Kindle, last month in July 2025. Criminale, Ollie at Criminale, great channel. He talks about a lot of crime and mystery books as well as other things, and he reviewed this book earlier this month, and I went, oh, that sounds cool. I'll check that out, and I'm glad I did. I'm always on the lookout for a cool kind of golden age style classic detective novel series. And this book is the fourth in the Spectre Locked Room Mystery series by Tom Mead. Now, Spectre is Joseph Spectre. He's seemingly elderly, although much more, at first his looks can be deceiving and he has a much more vitality when he's on the stage, so to speak. But he's a former stage illusionist and magician in the kind of interwar years between World War I and World War II. In fact, this book's set on the eve of World War II in, around London or in that vicinity. And Joseph Spectre is an interesting character. I'm sure there's more background given to him in the first three novels. This is the fourth in the series. I really enjoyed this one, though. Full of it's a twisty plot with lots of different, triple and double bluffs and, multiple identities being teased out over the course of the book. I'll just read you a little bit of the blurb that's on Amazon about this book. I didn't buy the physical copy of this book. I got a Kindle version and read that because I can usually get my hands on it much more swiftly, even in Japan where their shipping is quite fast and reasonable, but through Amazon Prime especially. But this one I just got on the Kindle version and enjoyed it. It's a little overpriced, I would say, unlike the independent author guys that I read earlier that I referred to, who were much more reasonably priced. But this it was definitely a worthwhile read, and I will try to check more of the series out later. So the plot summary reads thusly: in this latest locked room mystery from the author of Cabaret Macabre, that's the third Spectre mystery, amateur sleuth Joseph Spectre pits his knowledge of stage magic against the seemingly supernatural when a seance at an isolated old hospital turns deadly. Now remember, this is in 1939 or so, so it's a period mystery. An apparent suicide in a London townhouse uncannily mirrors a similar incident from 25 years ago, prompting Scotland Yard's George Flint to delve deep into the past in search of the solution to a long-forgotten mystery. Meanwhile, Joseph Spectre travels with a coach party through the rainy English countryside to visit an allegedly haunted house on a lonely island called Devil's Neck. The house, first built by a notorious alchemist and occultist, was later used as a field hospital in the First World War before falling into disrepair. The visitors hold a seance to conjure the spirit of a long dead soldier, but when a storm floods the narrow causeway connecting Devil's Neck to the mainland, they find themselves stranded in the haunted house. Before long, the guests begin to die one by one, and it seems that the only possible culprit is the phantom soldier. Flint's and Spectre's investigations are in fact closely linked, but it is only when the duo are reunited at the storm-lashed Devil's Neck that the truth is finally revealed. Tom Mead once again creates a brilliant homage to John Dickson Carr and the golden age of mysteries with this intricately plotted puzzle. Sounds pretty cool, huh? Well, it is pretty cool. I would say this is very much in the golden age detective mode. Now, I have a feeling I'm familiar with Tom Mead's name. He might have been running a blog where he reviewed various classic and especially puzzle or locked room murder mysteries, which is a kind of subsection of classic murder mysteries. These locked room mystery fans, what they like above all else, they like a good main detective, and they like interesting characters and all that, but their chief love of that kind of mystery is the locked room, of fiendishly clever locked room murder mystery with several layers and lots of cluing, lots of fair cluing. And I did a video in the past about my John Dickson Carr collection, about his many detectives. He was considered the master of the locked room murder mystery, and Tom Mead is obviously highly influenced by Carr and other similar writers, and just classic murder mysteries in general. Now, Joseph Spectre is a cool character. He's kind of kept slightly mysterious, which is probably part of the image he cultivates as being a former stage magician and illusionist. But we have some of the book written from the point of view of different characters, mainly George Flint, the detective who's friends with Spectre and has worked with him on past cases and tries to use some of Spectre's own methods to solve the case. And the other one is a young woman who has some more personal stakes in this case than just what she at first appears, but she's an assistant to a supposed medium, a kind of supposed psychic that's been summoned to this place to try to reach to the vibes of the ether. Remember, at this time period, spiritualism and seances were all the rage. So, all these different characters, some of them start getting murdered off one by one, and then Spectre has to try to piece the crime together, the criminal, and pinpoint which one of these guests at this old field hospital estate out on this remote causeway, which becomes almost like an island when the storm comes through and no one can get out. It's one of those classic golden age tropes where it's an isolated setting and people start getting bumped off one by one, a la Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. Now, is it one of the people that is there already? Is it someone else who was snuck in somehow, a third party who's toying with them and taking them out one by one? Who knows? But Spectre figures it out with some help from his Scotland Yard man, Detective George Flint. Anyway, fun mystery, really tricksy and cleverly plotted, and full of nice gothic atmosphere, rain-lashed storms and, secret passageways and creepy dolls and strange masks and history of past betrayals in World War I, etc. It's a heady stew, and it's but very cleanly plotted and easy to read. I recommend that highly. Now I know some people think, oh, you started with the fourth one. Why don't you start with the first one? Are you an animal? I know some podcasters I used to listen to would say, you're not animals. Don't start in the middle of the series. But I wouldn't dare do that when like a fantasy trilogy or something that had a lot of connective tissue. But with a murder mystery series, a detective novel series, I've never had a problem jumping in the middle somewhere. And then, each of those is designed to be a standalone, really, even though there might be some elements referred to in the past. And there are a few here. But it's not necessary to start at the beginning. I will probably go back to the beginning, but almost every mystery series I can think of that I really enjoy, I never read the first book first. So I don't think it really matters if the author does a good job of treating it like a standalone in most respects. So I recommend that one. Next, I read, and this is kind of through the month, I would do a chapter here or a chapter there, and I finished it up last week, and that is a book that I showed in my 10 Untouched Books tag, one of the few tag videos I've done. It was the first tag video I did, and a while back, and that is Gerald Durrell's The Drunken Forest. Now this is kind of a beat up Penguin version. You can almost see the light coming through as the cover is barely hanging on. I need to replace this because this was an excellent book, as most Gerald Durrell books are. Now, who is Gerald Durrell, you ask? Well, I talked about him a bit in that video, which I'll also link to below. But Gerald Durrell was a naturalist and kind of self-made naturalist, and collected animals for zoos for years, for London and other zoos in the 50s and 60s. Then he started to create his own zoo on the Isle of Jersey, and was very heavily into conservation issues later in his life. This is about an account when he was a comparatively young man, and with his wife Jackie, they head down to Argentina and then off into the Chaco region of Paraguay to collect animals and just and try to bring some back to England. Just a really fun, beautifully written, full of great detail about animals and collecting animals. And again, it sounds bad. Sounds in these days where a lot of us, myself included, kind of feel bad for animals in zoos. They should be left in the wild. But, at that time, Durrell was really hoping to not only spread the word about these sometimes rare animals to other people back in England, back in the UK, but also, again, even at that time, really worried about their conservation. And he treats them very well. You can tell throughout the book, he does his absolute best to keep them well fed and happy. Anyway, let me just talk a little bit about this book. Mainly, I want to read you a little excerpt to show you, not only does this Penguin edition have wonderful illustrations from Ralph Thompson throughout, but Gerald Durrell is just a fantastic writer. And here early on, so the book starts, here's some wonderful example of the kind of art you can see through here. And Durrell is really great at capturing the personality of these various animals that they bring back to add to their collections and to the zoos that they capture and treat and take a lot of trouble to find the kind of food they like and take good care of them. And he definitely shows their distinct personalities and the names they give the animals. He also is very good at doing the same thing with the people he encounters, especially their housekeeper, Paula, who seems quite an interesting character, and all the other various people they meet who guide them into the jungle and across the Chaco region, which is like a very swampy, marshy, strange landscape. And a woman named Babita, this kind of wealthy but very loving socialite who everybody loves, and she kind of is the kind of saving angel, guardian angel of Jerry as his wife calls him, Gerald Durrell, and his friends call him also. When they need a place to store animals overnight before they can be shipped out, or they need this or they need that, or they need someone to talk, bargain or haggle down on prices for animals that Jerry wants to buy, they call Babita and she sorts it out. She's quite a fun character. Anyway, let me read you a little bit of this passage to show you just a bit of how great a writer and how descriptive a writer Gerald Durrell is. We're talking about going out into this Chaco region of Paraguay, and it's a very unusual landscape, and this is kind of the Drunken Forest that they're talking about. And indeed, the whole landscape did look as though nature had organized an enormous bottle party, inviting the weird mixture of temperate, subtropical, and tropical plants to it. Everywhere, the palms leaned tiredly, the professional bar loungers with their 2 long heads of hair. The thorn bushes grappled in an inebriated brawl, the well-dressed flowers and the unshaven cacti side by side, and everywhere the palo borrachos stood with their bulging beer drinkers' stomachs tilted at unbalanced angles, and everywhere among this floral throng hurried the widow tyrants, the small, slick waiters with incredibly immaculate shirt fronts. Now those last are birds. So anyway, highly descriptive prose, beautifully written, full of great metaphors, similes, as well as being just full of all sorts of amusing anecdotes, including Sarah Huggersack, the anteater, the giant anteater, baby anteater that is brought to them when they're hanging out in the Chaco region of Paraguay, and quickly ingratiates herself with Jerry and his wife Jackie. Anyway, here's a little drawing of Babita. Jerry's calling her in desperation to find a place to store his animals upon arrival back in Buenos Aires in Argentina. And as always, Babita fulfills her promise and gets something done to help him out. Anyway, lovely book, really beautifully done. I highly recommend anything that Gerald Durrell wrote, really, but especially his memoir about growing up on the Isle of Corfu for several years in the before World War II, Corfu trilogy collection, which has all 3 of them. My Family and Other Animals, Birds, Beasts, and Relatives, which was recently reviewed on Deb's channel, Omnivorous Reader, and she did a really good review of that, and My Family and Other Animals, and I'm sure she'll get to The Garden of the Gods soon. That's the 3rd in that series, and that's all about his family. And of course, Gerald Durrell's older brother, Lawrence Durrell, was famous for writing the Alexandria Quartet and several other mainstream fiction books at the time. But very different writer in a lot of ways than Gerald Durrell, and frankly, I prefer Gerald Durrell. Now, I also, speaking of indie authors, I also just read a brief novella, I guess, by a writer called Erik S. Brown, who seems to focus on kind of horror novels featuring rampaging big feet, I guess, Sasquatches taking on, elite military units and survivalists, etc. And this one sounded just too fun to pass up, and it was fun in a comic book, silly kind of way, and that's Cryptid War by Erik S. Brown. Now, Cryptid War is interesting. It's basically something is causing cryptids to come out of the woodwork and start killing humans with impunity. Rage-filled Sasquatches break into a church at the beginning of the book, and just very gory and comic booky fashion to decimate the congregation. And one man who turns out to be a former Green Beret manages to escape and kill a couple of the big feet on his way out. He ends up being crucial in the narrative. Elsewhere, some giant albino alligators come out, or crocodiles come out of the sewers near New York and chomp on a 12-year-old and his mom. And there's these little vignettes all through the book of people being, coming to gruesome ends. And in fact, most humans come to gruesome ends, including the main characters of this book in most cases. But essentially, the military is aware of what's going on, and they're approached by a Catholic priest who's part of a secret organization in the church that deals with these kind of entities in the past, and he has some knowledge and information that whatever is causing this outbreak across the world is the source, or the instigating force is located somewhere in North Carolina, and which happens to be about where this Green Beret at the beginning of the book had his issues with the rampaging Sasquatches. Anyway, a crack military team with this priest goes down there to try to fight their way to the source and rid the world of it and stop the crazy cryptid violence, which also includes, there's a scene of a guy coming to a really nasty end by a group of hatchet and knife carrying goblins near London, a giant destroyer or aircraft controller being overrun by these weird kind of jellyfish-like blobs that with acid that burns through all the bodies they come onto in the crew, and they burn through the hold of the ship to sink it, etc. And there's thunderbirds attacking, and kind of Mothman shows up. So pretty fun, fast-paced, a lot of brutal action, and not a lot of character development. I think it probably would have benefited from being a little longer, but it gets to the point. I wouldn't, give this, I'd probably give it 3 stars out of 5 if I was were going to rate it. It's just kind of a fun, quick, silly kind of read, trashy kind of read, I guess. But it's well done for all that. It's pretty well written. The writer, Erik S. Brown, I would check out some more of his work, although, I think he seems to have a kind of formula that he follows. But he's a good writer of kind of gruesome, graphic, bloody action. And if you like that kind of thing and you like cryptids like I do, it might be enjoyable. Now, the last book I read is the second book in the Elric saga by Michael Moorcock. That's The Sailor on the Seas of Fate. Isn't that a great title? It's a great book, too. Now, Tim at Secret Fire Books, who I mentioned earlier, who is a writer in his own right, and Chris at Liminal Spaces, and John, Uncle Jim at News from the Gelding, also an indie author. They have been going through, they're in the middle of a project, or I guess in the 2/6 of the way through, read through of the main 6 Elric novels in the Elric saga. Now there are, I think, 8 or 9 of them total, or maybe even more, but the key ones are 6. Elric is this, without going into too much detail, I covered some of the beginnings from the first novel that I reviewed last month and talked about in my July wrap-up video, Elric of Melnibone. But Elric is the emperor of Melnibone, the last and the most recent in line for rule. And the Melnibians are a kind of decadent, hedonistic race. And Elric is a very interesting character. He has a real sense of fair play and morality that doesn't really suit his amoral background or the people that he should rule. It's a way of looking at the world. And in the end of Elric of Melnibone, he's kind of put aside. He's walked away from rule of Melnibone and passed it to his betraying and scumbag cousin Urkun, who hounded him through the first novel, and bid farewell to his lady love Samoril to go out into the young kingdoms, the other more human-based places around islands around Melnibone, and to kind of wander through and learn what he can about the world around him before he goes back to reclaim his throne. And in the end of the last book, the first book there, he got a hold of this, he made a pact with this chaos god or deity, Ariok, and got a hold of the sword Stormbringer, which is hungry for souls. When he kills someone, an enemy or whatever, Stormbringer moans and shakes in his hand and sucks the soul out of the creature or human. And this is going to tie into a dark and destiny, a grim destiny for Elric going forward. And that's, heavily foreshadowed all through the first novel. Now, this novel is even better than the first one because it finds Elric on straight up adventure mode. As at the beginning of this one, there again, like in the first Elric of Melnibone, there it is broken up into 3 different kind of stories or episodes: book 1, book 2, book 3. Book 1 starts off quite interestingly. We're thrown in media res as Elric has fled from some enemy human kingdom soldiers who want to kill him and are hounding him across the island, and he's on the shore and he's kind of exhausted and he doesn't know what he's going to do or where he's going to go, and he falls into a fitful slumber, and then when he wakes up he hears a ship pulling up, and it turns out that the ship is there for him, and someone comes out and hails him and has him come aboard, and basically he's been summoned. A ship that sails the seas of fate, as the title implies, and it's basically a ship that captain is blind, and his brother is the mute helmsman that carries a bunch of a crew of warriors from various times and planes of existence that have all come onto this ship for whatever reason, and they're been kind of recruited for a mission. They kind of go to this hub island. This island has spokes on the wheel of all these different worlds and planes of existence, and Elric is part of Michael Moorcock's Eternal Champions cycle, which includes the Hawkmoon series and the Corum series. And there's another hero here that I'm not familiar with, Erik. I don't know much about this person. Anyway, this is kind of an interesting crossover book, a story where all of these different champions, or some of Moorcock's fantasy series champions, have come together. They've been drawn together because they have to unite in some kind of weird being to fight this brother and sister, I guess, deities or beings of some sort, these powerful sorceress brother and sister who are about to devour the whole universe, and unless these 4, including Elric, join together to defeat it. And that's quite an interesting and fascinating and weird opening book to story. Each one of these, in at least my Kindle edition, 55 pages for each book, and they're kind of evenly split in length, about 7 chapters each or so. Again, Moorcock's writing is smooth and descriptive and very good, and I enjoyed this story quite a bit. And basically Elric gets back onto the ship, and in the second story he is dropped off from this mysterious vessel into this place where it's the only chance where he'll be able to get through the gate, some kind of magical doorway to lead him back to his own time and own plane of existence. Basically, he ends up allied with this other kind of sea captain whose ship was destroyed by some pirates, and Elric helps decimate a bunch of these nasty scumbags and who are stranded in this kind of weird world where there's no birds and no fish and no plants, nothing to eat pretty much around this island. They have to try to find a way off of it, and they get involved in this very interesting love triangle, I guess you could say. But it's an interesting story. I probably like this one arguably the best of the 3. I found I liked Elric, for all his strangeness to the other human characters and his kind of brooding, self-doubting nature, is a powerful character and quite likable and sympathetic character. And he's quite civil and loyal as much as possible to his boon companions that come along. Now, this kind of turns on him a little bit in the third story. So Elric and his friend from the second story, Count Smjorgen, they're rescued by Duke Avron Astron, and who's kind of I get the image of he's a bold adventurer type, and is leading a crew. He wants to sail to this mystical kind of no man's land beyond the boiling sea, in this mystical city that apparently used to be perhaps the birthplace of Elric's people. And Elric is intrigued in spite himself, and Duke Aaron wants him to come along with him and use some of his sorcery and etc. to help find the treasures that may lie therein. And Elric can't help but be intrigued to find out some answers about his own people's origins. And so they go along and they end up fighting some snake beastmen and finding this lost city. And it's an interesting story, kind of a lost world story with some cool and odd and weird touches all the way through, including this giant jade statue of Ariok, the chaos god, the chaos lord that Elric is pledged to. But Elric has to summon him at some stage, and there's these the statue has these giant crystal eyes which have fallen out of the statue, and at one point Elric and his companions go in there, and there's all sorts of weird mazes where they see themselves, and it's a very unusual and interesting tale. And all three of these, they do feel like a novel. They have a definite flow. It's an episodic style situation, but definitely one ends off and the next begins right where the last one left off, basically all the way through. And it's beautifully written, really interesting. Elric is a fascinating character. I highly recommend this book. It's, I think, even better than the first one. I think others would probably concur with that. Really looking forward to the next one, The Weird of the White Wolf, another fantastic title. So that was The Sailor on the Seas of Fate by Michael Moorcock. Just want to talk briefly about a few short stories or novellas that I read, novelettes, I should say. And I read a couple of the first two tales in this lovely Ivy Frost collection from Hafner Press. Now, Ivy Frost is a kind of Doc Savage type character mixed with Sherlock Holmes, I guess you would say. He's a one-man band, really. He only has one assistant that joins him in the first story, and that is a drop-dead, gorgeous, plucky and adventurous and very capable young woman named Jean Moray. And in the first story, Frost, she's kind of in trouble, and she also answers an ad that is recruiting for an assistant for Frost. And this first adventure kind of acts as a extended and very dangerous interview and recruitment process as she goes on to accompany Frost for the remaining 17 tales that were written by Donald Wandrei. Donald Wandrei, again, a Weird Tales writer, as well as writing for other pulps like Clues Detective magazine pulp, where they have, again, all the covers of the 18 different pulp issues of Clues Detectives that all these stories appeared in, starting with the first one, then the next 8, and then there's one on the back flap as well, and then another 8 covers, most of them with Ivy Frost cover stories. Quite a popular character in the Clues Detective magazine. And Frost is a really interesting character. He's kind of tall and gaunt and not described as handsome in any way, but he's very compelling character, and Jean Moray eventually is really drawn to him and wants to, be his assistant. And eventually, I guess, an unrequited love grows there, but it's never really spoken of or anything. And she is a very cool character in her own right and gets a lot of the main focus of what's going on. In this first story, it's kind of a gangster story, and not so much in the way of weird elements included in that, but definitely there's some strange gothic and kind of grisly quasi-supernatural elements in Green Man Creeping, the second story. And this is kind of a scene right out of the book, really. And this was quite an interesting one, too. The first book ends with the great kind of fight and introduction of a unnamed kind of nemesis, a Moriarty, if you will, to Ivy Frost. But there's a cool siege of a gangster's hideout at the end with Jean Marais, having a little. Ivy Frost has tons of gadgets and potions and things he uses a la Doc Savage, and one of them is a bulletproof little shield, and Jean Marais and Frost are crawling over to this place to rescue a prisoner in this gangster's hideout, and Jean is shooting guys off the roof, and she's presented as quite a badass in her own right. And she goes undercover in the second story in a way. Essentially, it's like a family curse story. This rich man dies, and then on this kind of anniversary of his death, or around this time period, his family members keep being killed off. Is someone killing them off to get a hold of their fortune? Is it for revenge? What's happening? The last surviving in the line is a young socialite who's kind of lived a carefree life until it's her turn next, basically, to be terrorized by this weird green creeping man and other menace that seems to be out to kill her, like her brother and sister and mother before her. And she's at her wit's end and, just suffering a nervous breakdown, basically. And she comes as a last resort to Ivy Frost. And Jean Marais goes in as her new nurse and to filtrate the household and see if there's any inside man or woman working on their angle. And Frost is working his side of it. And what they find in this kind of weird, the woman says there's this strange creeping thing that looks like a weird kind of slug / humanoid thing with no arms or legs oozing its way across the floor towards her in her bedroom and, scaring her half to death. Very interesting story. Of course, it has a Scooby-Doo sort of rationale of sorts in it. I don't know if any of these stories actually have full-on supernatural elements. I'm guessing not, because they are detective stories, kind of noirish, pulpy action-adventure crime stories. So I'm sure, just like in Doc Savage novels, for the most part, the seemingly supernatural menace will be revealed to have a scientific or illusionist background. Although, to be fair to Doc Savage, he does really meet dinosaurs. He does really meet some weird creatures and lost race peoples at times. So not always is it something that's put up job by someone. Anyway, these are two really fun stories. They're each about 45 pages. And I'm looking forward to getting through the rest of these in this beautiful edition from Hafner Press. So that does it for today's video. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate you taking the time to check out my videos and my ramblings about books and other things. So take care and enjoy what you're reading. We'll see you next time.